it is clear now that this administration is going to use the DOJ as a weapon in a way that the previous administration did not. In retrospect, I think that President Biden was right when he preemptively pardoned a number of people. And I am someone who can admit it when I get something wrong. I didn't specifically say it was terrible for him to have done it. I pulled all the language that I used on this show and on my TV show to go back and look at what I said. As I see what this administration has done with the Department of Justice, I think it is fair to say that President Biden was right to preemptively pardon General Mark Milley, Dr. Anthony Fauci, members of Congress, and even members of his family. Now, that does not include Hunter Biden, because that wasn't a preemptive pardon. That was a pardon after the fact. And on that one, I still maintain that he promised he wouldn't do it. He promised he would let the U.S. attorney investigate it, and he lied about it and changed his mind. So on that one, I'm not reversing the position that I took. But I went back to find exactly what I said about the preemptive pardons, and I talked about it twice. And I said, after criticizing Kash Patel as the possible FBI director, this is when he was nominated, or when he was being considered, I guess. And I said it was insane. I said, quote, but regardless, President Biden telling us the mere threat of a prosecution of James Biden was enough for him to invoke the pardon power in the final minutes of his presidency. This, in conjunction with his pardon of Hunter Biden, feels like the very abuse of power for personal gain that Republicans were investigating. And then when I talked about it another time, I was also talking about my concerns about Kash Patel. And I said, and yet, I also think this idea of preemptive pardons is a terrible one. It sets a horrible precedent and sure makes it seem like the folks who accept the pardon are guilty of something. Turns out, I think President Biden was right. He was right to preemptively pardon Fauci and the January 6th committee and even some of his family members. Because it is clear now that this administration is going to use the DOJ as a weapon in a way that the previous administration did not. And I know that that leads to smoke coming out of the ears of some on the right. And I've talked about this many times. I have looked into this, and this DOJ investigated and prosecuted more Democrats than Republicans. And as I've said before, Merrick Garland tried not to prosecute Trump. The reason the left was so angry at Merrick Garland in 2021 is because he didn't. And it wasn't until the documents case happened and a special prosecutor was appointed, and that special prosecutor in Jack Smith decided to indict, that it all happened. So this was not a weaponization. This was Trump continuing to do things that were getting him into trouble. Now, those of you who listen to the show regularly know I've been very critical of the Manhattan DA's case. I was very critical of the Fulton County case as well. But I thought that the classified documents case was very strong against Trump. I think it almost had to be brought because they had tried to do everything they could to avoid it. And I thought that while I didn't believe that as a practical and political matter, they ought to charge Trump in connection with January 6th, I thought they had a strong legal case of what remained of it after the Supreme Court. It's a long way of saying that what this administration is doing is different. They are literally just going after their political enemies, and they are going to protect their political allies. We've seen that already with the pardons of the January 6th folks, of all of them, including the ones who attacked police. We're seeing investigations that are being dropped against potential Trump allies. And I put together a list of all of the politicized investigations that have already begun. In the vast majority of them, these are overtly political. If you're going to charge the Newark mayor with trespassing and ice scuffle and Representative LaMonica McIver, you can't pardon the January 6th folks. Meaning, you want to tell me that you're one of these people, like me, who thinks that anyone who engaged in any violence or destruction of property should have been charged in connection with January 6th and ought to have had significant sentences. Then I'm willing to talk about charging Representative McIver for what she did in the ice scuffle. But if you're going to tell me that you think that those pardons were warranted, I can't have that conversation with you. I'm sorry. The investigation of James Comey for posting seashells that says 8647 and suggesting, 86 means kill him. Ridiculous. Letitia James being investigated for mortgage fraud, we got to see what happens, right? I mean, there's no question she's being targeted because she's Letitia James. But, hey, if you're the Attorney General of New York and you're engaging in shenanigans with your mortgage, if that's true, then she brings it upon herself. Governor Andrew Cuomo now being investigated by the DOJ for lying to Congress. Again, this is an effort to resurrect something old, to go after Cuomo to try to help Mayor Adams. But it would seem that the Trump team didn't learn a really valuable lesson from their own experience, which is using the courts in cases that seem politicized only helps the person being investigated. There's a reason Donald Trump showed up for the civil case against him brought by Letitia James. He didn't need to be there. He wanted to be there because it was good for him politically. He knew the Manhattan DA case was good for him politically. If Andrew Cuomo is charged, it will help him in New York, not hurt him. The city of Chicago and Mayor Brandon Johnson being investigated by DOJ for potentially race-based hiring practices after Johnson talked about hiring black people for many top positions. Ridiculous. The single most ridiculous investigation is that of Trump's cybersecurity director, Chris Krebs, being investigated for abuse of government power for defending the 2020 election. The guy has lost his job. He's lost his security clearance. And that's something else, is a lot of other folks have lost their security clearance. All these law firms that have been targeted, where they've lost their security clearance because Donald Trump doesn't like the positions that they're taking. It is shameful. Also, Miles Taylor, a.k.a. Anonymous, former Trump DHS official, being investigated for the book he wrote that Donald Trump didn't like. And then in New Jersey, the governor himself is being investigated for obstructing federal immigration enforcement. It's not the way it works. Eugene Vindman, congressman now, Trump hates him, being investigated in connection with a business armed Ukraine. The one where I agree with the administration that many people think of as politicized was the Wisconsin judge, Hannah Dugan. Based on what I've seen in that case, whether you agree with immigration policy or not, when a judge helps sneak someone out of a courthouse, that's a potential crime. We'll see what happens, but I don't include that in the list of ridiculously politicized cases. There is no doubt in my mind that if Mark Milley and Anthony Fauci and members of the January 6th committee had not been pardoned, they would now be investigated. That is very troubling and makes me think in retrospect, that President Biden was right to preemptively pardon these folks, even though it sets a terrible precedent. What we have seen is much worse in terms of balancing, right? On this show, I try not to do the everybody's equal stuff, right? I can both say I think preemptive pardons are very dangerous. They are. But I think what we've seen from the Trump administration in the politicization of it is worse. So in that sense, I think President Biden was right. Well, let me say it this way. In retrospect, President Biden was right to preemptively pardon a number of key officials and even his family members. And I was wrong in the criticism that I gave of it. Now, again, even when I was criticizing it, I was saying I was of two minds, right? It's not like I was saying, this is an outrage, this is ridiculous. I said I was of two minds is the exact quote of what I said about it. But nevertheless, I was still critical. It's important to be able to say, maybe I wasn't right about something. It's something we don't see enough of, right? Because in the current environment we live in, it's all about doubling down and tripling down, never saying you're sorry.